And look at that. We are live. We are in our pre-show of today's N10-009 Network Plus Study Group. Thanks for joining us. We will get started at the top of the hour. You can see by the big clock on the tablet that we have about 8.5 minutes left before we get to that point. I am in the process of setting up the studio, making sure that everything is working somewhat the way that it should be. Yes, everything is working the way that it should be. Hello, chat room. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have all new questions for Network Plus in this first hour. And of course, we have questions for our second hour for you to submit. I don't think we have any that have been submitted yet. Let's look over my shoulder while I look at the Q&A. We have one question in the Q&A. You guys are working already to get the questions in there. You can, of course, use the link on your screen to either submit questions for the second hour. We call that our after show. Or you can use that same link to answer questions. There is technically a question on the screen, which is, where are you joining from? And we have this virtual pin cushion. Let's see if I can put it up on my screen so that you can see it. You can put your virtual pin cushion right here so you can add your pin to the map of the world. And looks like North America is represented so far. We have other folks that will certainly join in the meantime. And this is what I'm currently working on, though. We're just trying to make sure that I can find everything I need, that it's all up to date. Those all look right. Everything with Network Plus is good. All of the okay, things look fine there. Our cameras are here in this middle section of 4 cameras. I have this extra stream camera here at the bottom. It's really just a repeat of what we see here on the left side. And I was really thinking that's the one I would use, but it's so small, so tiny. I can't really see what's going on there, which is why we have, well, if you're going to need to see, you probably want, a 27-inch monitor at least. So that's what that is. So anyway, that's always something worthwhile and useful to have there. Thanks for being in the chat. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being there. Will I ever do Pin Test Plus? Well, considering I think you're the only person to ask me this calendar year, I would argue that perhaps it's not on the top of our list. It would be fun to do. That would be a good one, right? Pin test. That's always exciting. That's very Hollywood movie-ish. And the reality of that job, of course, it is absolutely nothing like Hollywood or the hackers that get in. It's mostly a lot of report writing. If you like to write reports, Pen Test Plus is for you. I think the first section of the Pen Test Plus exam objectives are, tell us about your writing skills. Tell us about the report that you're going to create right now. I don't think that's really what it says, but it probably should. There is almost as much writing in the Security Plus side, but not on the Security Plus exam. There's just too many fundamentals you have to get in place. What are we going to do with this phone, everybody? Well, first we're going to put things into a do not disturb. We'll just have it not ring because I've got people that are out and about right now to figure things out. Thanks for being here, everybody. You guys got a lot going on right here. We've got so many good questions for you today. I spent last week really going through and creating some new questions, getting some extra things there. So we have some good things there that are coming today. Performance-based questions are always a challenge. So I like to really get in there and see if I can mix it up a little bit. We've been doing a lot of different kinds of those. So we'll figure out what you like on this live stream. We'll be getting started in about 4 minutes and 45 seconds as my big clock on the desk. It's not on the wall. Should have a clock on the wall, but I don't have a clock on the wall. I think it'd be taunting me, wouldn't it? I think it would. So there's no clock on the wall. I'll just rely to the taunting that comes naturally on the clock that's on my phone or the clock that's on my wrist, or in this case, the clock that is on my table, my desk. This enormous thing. I can't even reach. The desk is so long that I've still got another foot if I stretch my arms out on both sides. So it's a big desk. And you can see I've just put everything on it. Everything that you need to do a live stream is on this desk or in this desk. You can't really see it. There are two 19-inch racks, one on the left, one on the right. They're behind kind of a soundproofing I don't know if I even open it up if you can still hear because of the way the mic's. Yeah, it's still kind of quiet even then. So they aren't particularly loud in what they are doing in there, because there's on the right side here, you can sort of see the Cylons going around. I'll move the lower third there. The Cylons that are going around there, they are recording the audio and video of this. So they're working to keep up with that. On the left side, those pretty red and green colors are the video switcher. It's kind of loud. That's probably louder on the left side, right? Let's find out. See, you can't really hear any of this. Yeah, I have a filter that keeps all of the noises that happen in the background away. So when I stop talking, it goes to nothing. So I'll just stop talking here now. And then it just goes to nothing. Even though there's air conditioning running, there's a fan above me, there's other things that are happening. There's noises around. There will people be outside, but we've got a very directional mic in the mic that we use. This is a Heil PR40. It's a very directional mic. So if I even go off mic a little bit, I'm talking exactly the same. But if I go off mic just a tad, you can see there's quite a difference in what's happening there. So that combined with the inline compression slash it's really noise gate is what's causing that not to send anything. So I've got a noise gate on that. Works fine. Works great. So we'll figure out the details. No, it's a mono. Everything is mono. This is a mono config. I do not talk in stereo, so I do not publish in the stereo. So we'll wait for the first live album. We'll make sure is in stereo. So we'll have that going for us. There's no live album that's coming. 2 minutes left. 2 minutes to go, everybody. We will get things started in just a moment. This live stream is available immediately afterwards on YouTube as a replay, and I send out or post a replay information on my website. A holiday album. What a lovely idea. What a horribly, horribly bad idea that is. I'm not sure that you didn't ask for it. You don't want it. You'll hate it. Here it is. That's sort of how, isn't that how most music is these days? Isn't that how most movies are? We know you're not going to like it. We know it's bad, but here it is. Congratulations. Are we expected to memorize the different Wi-Fi generations and their speeds? You're expected to know everything that is listed in the CompTIA exam objectives. That is the best advice I can give you, because that really does spell it out. I'll talk about it more during this live stream, especially in the after show. No one wants to hear me singing Jingle Bells. That's not true. Negative people want to see me. I mean, they will show up and say, before you start, could you not? We've got a list of people that have requested that you never do this. So it's actually negatives. There's a negative number of people that would like to hear me singing Jingle Bells. It's not just zero. I feel like there's a groundswell of support for me not doing that. Like most of the things that I work on. It's very similar to that. How often are these? We do a live stream for each of our study groups. We do 4 live streams a month, 2 for A+, 1 for Network Plus, that's the one today, and 1 for Security Plus. Figure those out. 15 seconds to go. I got to get, here we are. Suddenly I realize after talking to you for 10 minutes, I have a live stream to do. So we're going to go here. Let's go up to our keynote. Let's get a green light. We got a green light on the keynote. Click, 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 click. That all works. This all works. That all works. It's time to do a live stream, everybody. Let's see if I can remember the way any of these things are supposed to work. Here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 2025 Professor Messer N10-009 Network Plus Study Group. This is the study group where I ask you questions that come directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. And if you know your exam objectives, you will be able to answer these in real time if you're joining us live. If you're not joining us live, that's fine too. You can, of course, go to anything that we are doing online, watch the replays. And as you're watching the replay, although you cannot participate interactively, you can still participate with yourself. You just sort of figure out the answers, write them down, make a note of them, try to keep up with what we're doing. You just won't be able to submit them online, which is fine. That's not a problem. I think there'll be something that we can do for everyone. If you are here live, this is the link that you will use. Go to professormesser.com/QA to submit your answer to the questions that we will have available for you today. In fact, I have a very first question that I like to do. That is a question from last month, just to see if you're able to get in and do this properly. So if you pop open a new browser window, there will be a question waiting for you at professormesser.com/QA. Before I tell you this question, one thing to keep in mind is that our standing rule in the study group is that we want to answer the questions at the link that you see on your screen, professormesser.com/QA. Please do not put any answers in the chat room. Please don't put any hints in the chat room. The question I have for you today is this one. Our rewind question is, a technician would like to query a DNS server for the FQDN of a specific IP address. Which of the following records should be configured on the DNS server? Would that be PTR, MX, PTR, MX, CNAME, A, or TXT? You got a few to choose from. Now, we're going to come back to this question in just a moment. There's the question. We will come back to this one in just a moment because I would like to give you a little bit more information about this live stream right now, but this will just stay there so you can submit the question anytime by going to professormesser.com/QA. Well, we do one of these study groups every month for Network Plus. Of course, we do 2 A+ study groups, a Network Plus and a Security Plus study group every month. If you're into Security Plus, our Security Plus study group is next week at this time. So if you just show up again a week from today, you'll be watching our Security Plus study group. We do all new questions every time, so there's always something new that we can talk about. Of course, when we're not doing our study groups, you can find out more at professormesser.com/YouTube. That's where our entire Network Plus course is. You can watch every minute of every video on our YouTube channel or on our website. We, of course, post a weekly Network Plus pop quiz question to professormesser.com/Twitter and professormesser.com/X. They're the same thing. I don't know if you've heard. The news is out. And also, we have the same question posted as a pretty picture over on Instagram, professormesser.com/Instagram. Of course, if you'd like to find us on any social media, just type in professormesser.com/LinkedIn/Discord/Facebook. You get the idea. That's a good way to do it. The topics that we're going to cover today are topics that CompTIA has already provided to us and everyone else. They are contained within the CompTIA official CompTIA exam objectives document, and we will talk more about that objectives document as we go through this list. There's also documentation about the N10-009 that you should be aware of. This is the current version of the Network Plus exam. It's the only available version of the Network Plus exam. It was released in June the 20th of 2024, which means that we are about 1 year into the life of this particular version of the Network Plus certification exam, which means this will probably still be around for another 2.5 years, which means that we estimate the retirement date for this version of the exam to be Q4, calendar year Q4 of 2027. The exam itself is a single exam that you need to pass. It's 90 minutes in length, and you can get a maximum of 90 questions. It is available and scored on a scale of 100 to 900. It's an unusual scale, and the score that you need to earn is a 720. The exam itself consists of multiple choice questions and performance-based questions, both of which we will cover in today's live stream. Also let you know that I have downloadable versions of all of these videos, audio versions. We have course notes and more study information available on our website. If you want to learn more about it, you can find it at professormesser.com/netsuccess. I'll also let you know that this video replay will be available on YouTube immediately afterwards. I hit a stop button, takes a couple of minutes to process, and then you can watch the replay. I also have an audio-only version replay that I post in podcast format. If you'd like to add that to your favorite podcast listening program, you can find that at professormesser.com/podcast. If you're on a streaming media service, the podcast is probably already there. So if you're on Spotify, for example, just simply go to the search there, look for Professor Messer, and you'll see that all of those podcasts will show up automatically. It's an easy way to start listening when you're in your car, when you're working out, or somewhere else where you can't watch the screen as it's going by. Also let you know that about a day after we're done, you'll notice that the YouTube video description will be updated and it will have all of these timestamps in it. These timestamps happen thanks to the hard work of my marketing manager, Lori. Hi, Lori. She's watching the replay and going through this entire video and putting those timestamps in for you so that you have the most accurate way to find the information that we cover during this live event. And since we tend to go for about 2 hours, it's a great way to find it very, very, very quickly. Thank you, Lori, for doing that. If those of you in the chat room appreciate it, make sure you give a wave and a hello and a thank you to Lori. She's watching that replay go by also, as she probably watches this at 2x speed. I hope she does anyway for something like that. And that will appear in the YouTube video description in about a day or so. We also, when we are not here live, you can go to professormesser.com/Discord and join us on our 24/7 chat rooms. I've also got rooms set up that you can open yourself and manage your own study group in the Discord itself, where you manage it, you're in control of it, you can lock it, you can open it, you can allow people in, you can kick people out. It's completely up to you. It's your study space. And you can do that right there on our Discord, professormesser.com/Discord. Join thousands of other people that are studying for their A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, and other certifications by visiting professormesser.com/Discord. Eventually, you will need to take your exam. And if you are in the U.S., Canada, or a U.S. territory, we would love it if you would join us on our website at professormesser.com/vouchers. I have discounted vouchers that are there for you. So you could, of course, go to the CompTIA website and pay full price, but why would you do that when the same vouchers are available at professormesser.com/vouchers? You don't need a special coupon code. You don't need to add any extensions into your browser. All you have to do is visit professormesser.com/vouchers, and they are available at a discounted rate automatically. Not only do you get the voucher, I'll even give you something extra. You get a free copy of my Exam Hacks ebook. This is an ebook I wrote with a number of tips and tricks that can help you with your studies and some strategies you can use during the exam itself to perhaps get you a few extra points. These are a compiled list of tips and tricks that I've accumulated through the years. Maybe it's something that can help you as well. You get all of that with the purchase of a voucher. We do not sell the Exam Hacks ebook by themselves. You can only get them with the purchase of a voucher or a success bundle. And you can find all of this at professormesser.com/vouchers. Let's look at the question we had earlier, which is a technician would like to query a DNS server for the FQDN of specific IP addresses. Which of the following records should be configured on the DNS server? Is it PTR, MX, CNAME, A, or TXT? Let's close our poll and see how we did. Well, we're a little mixed. In fact, this is very similar to the results we got last month. 41% of you was the plurality. The highest number of you answered PTR as the record that should be configured in this case. But 26% of you said A, and 24% of you said CNAME. So the second and third place actually combine to more than the first place option. So I think we have a good choice here out of these three. We have single digits, however, for MX or TXT, so none of you really felt, or very few of you felt, that that was really the right answer. It would not be an MX record. It would not be a TXT record. Very specific to what we're trying to do here is that we want to query the DNS server for the FQDN of an IP address. Normally, it's the reverse, isn't it? Normally, we're typing in a fully qualified domain name in our browser screen or somewhere else. We're typing in www.professormesser.com. And behind the scenes, it's figuring out the IP address. But what we're asking for is the opposite of that. We're asking to query the DNS server for the FQDN of a specific IP address. So we're going to give the DNS server an IP address and then tell us what fully qualified domain name is that associated with. What's important to know, however, is that the DNS server will only tell you that information if a record has been added to the DNS detailing what fully qualified domain name is associated with that IP address. And that record is a pointer record, a PTR. That's what PTR stands for. It is, think of it as the reverse of an A, an address record for IPv4, or a quad A, which is the IP address record for IP version 6. This is the opposite of that. I'm giving and putting into this particular record an IP address and I'm associating a name with that IP address, specifically a fully qualified domain name. And that's where, in fact, I can notice here, that's even whoever put that in my records here, that would be me, misspelled it. It's fully qualified domain name, not a fully domain qualified name. That would not be the same thing. But that is a good example, though, of where you would put this information into the DNS server. That pointer record can be so important. And if you query a DNS server with an IP address and you get no name back, it's because a pointer record doesn't exist. So that is what we would focus on for all of these. The answer, of course, that we were looking for is indeed the pointer record. That is the one that tells us what the particular answer is. There it is. And the others are not. We have a record, which is the address record. We've already talked about that. A CNAME record is a canonical name record that provides us with a different name for that server. So the server name could be www. We could also call that server email. We could call that server files. We could call that server shares. And we can put these CNAME records in the DNS server so that you can have a single record for the IP address and then multiple canonical names that are documented within it. We've got others in here. The MX record is to specify mail server or mail exchange. That's what the MX is for. And a TXT record can be used for so many different things. Very commonly, the TXT record is used to verify that you own a domain. It could be set for some of your anti-spam capabilities, and there's other capabilities and things you would put into the text record as well. That's the answer we were looking for. If you want to find the fully qualified domain name of the specific IP address, there will need to be a pointer record in the DNS server or a PTR. Hopefully that gives you something to think about with the different DNS records that you need to know on your exam. Let's now shift gears a little bit. As many of you know, the first new question of every study group is a performance-based question. Performance-based questions are a little bit different than the questions that are multiple choice. The question we just did was a multiple choice question, where there was a question, there were multiple answers to choose from, and if you didn't know the answer, in this case, you had a 20% chance of getting it right anyway. But CompTIA wants to make things a little bit more difficult for you. See if you really know the information that you've learned. And one way to do that is to ask any other kind of question that they would like. That's effectively what a performance-based question is. It's any other kind of question except for multiple choice. It could be a matching question, a fill in the blank, a drag and drop, putting you at a command prompt and having you perform a particular function, a particular command, to look at the output and be able to diagnose and look at what the output is telling you. There are many different ways to ask questions that come directly from the exam objectives. The important thing to remember with this is that if you know your exam objectives, it really doesn't matter how they ask the question. You will be able to answer it. So don't worry so much about the mechanics of the performance-based question. Instead, I would recommend you focus on the content of the exam objectives. Then it doesn't matter how they ask it. You'll know the answer, whatever you happen to be doing. So I have for you today a performance-based question. This one is a fill-in-the-blank question, and it's a fill-in-the-blank question with 6 different options. The question asks, associate an OSI layer to each description. So I have for you 6 descriptions on the screen, and I want you to tell me for each one of those what the associated OSI layer happens to be. So that's what I would recommend. This is also, if you are in a case where you're trying to remember things about the performance-based question, this is the thing where you can go back to your exam objectives and see what were they trying to tell me, what information was there. As always, of course, if you want to answer this question, please use the link at the bottom of your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to answer it. So let's go through all 6 of these. The first one is, a web server is listening on port 8080. Which OSI model is associated with that? The next one is, a bad RJ45 crimp has switched pins 1 and 7. What OSI layer would be associated with that? More questions that we have. The next one is, user devices are configured with an incorrect default gateway. What OSI layer is that one? Next three, we have an NGFW is blocking all SQL Server traffic. An 802.1q trunk is connecting 8 VLANs. And the last one is a user has forgotten their password and locked their account. Somebody been watching me this week? Because I'm getting really good at forgetting passwords and locking accounts lately. All in my lab. I have a separate protected secure wallet for everything I visit on the internet. But when I'm in my lab, I'm constantly forgetting passwords and having to unlock things that I'm running in my lab. So that has been me certainly this past week. Which OSI model is associated with that one? This might be a good one to step through. See if you know the answer. You can submit your answer at any time. Go to professormesser.com/QA to submit your answer. I'm seeing a few folks are submitting their answers for the OSI models right here. This, by the way, is a very good example of how CompTIA likes to ask questions. They never ask you anything direct. For example, we know that there are different layers to the OSI model, but a lot of people, I think, will study which layer is associated with the name of the layer. I don't think I'm giving much away. Well, I'm not going to give anything away. So let's say that layer 1 is the OSI model that we call redundancy. It's not, but I didn't want to give anything away. Many people will spend their time, layer 1 is redundancy, layer 1 is redundancy. And then they'll get a question like this and have to figure out, wait, where's the names? I thought we were going to put names into this, but it's not. We need to apply how those different layers are used and referenced on a production network, because that's how we use the OSI model. The OSI model isn't something you just memorize and you throw away. I worked as a next generation firewall systems engineer for many years, and I would reference the OSI model multiple times a day with different people we would visit, because it's a great way to explain how this technology is working, where problems occur, so that you can really focus on where the problem is rather than looking at the entire network as being the issue. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And after you do this, after a few times of going through and understanding the OSI model and breaking things out, and if you watch my video, I give you some interesting tips and tricks on how you can make that happen as well. This would be a good way to break those down and be able to understand them. So hopefully you're familiar with the OSI model. Let's see how you did with this one. We're going to step through all 6 of these to see if we can answer what we think the OSI model might be. Let's start with the one on the very top, and it is a web server is listening on port 8080. So we know that it's telling us there's a particular port number associated with the service on this device, and that port number is running on port 8080. Anytime you see anything associated with a specific TCP or UDP port number, it is referencing OSI layer 4, the session layer. That is one that gives you information about things at that TCP or UDP level if we're talking about IP version 4, for example. So another one of those layers we should really think about. So when you think about a port number, we have to memorize a lot of port numbers in section 1 of the exam, for example. Every time we're memorizing the port number, you should be thinking that's an OSI layer 4 reference. It makes it very easy to remember it later on. The next one on our list is a bad RJ45 crimp has switched pins 1 and pin 7. That's not gonna work. Did I say session layer on the other one? See, I've got session layer on my mind because I saw it in the chat earlier. This transport layer is your TCP and UDP. It's the transports, the boxes that we send across the internet. A bad RJ45 crimp has switched pins 1 and 7. See if you can figure out which layer we would use for that. Well, since it's the pins, the wires that we are using, the ability to send a signal from one side of the network to the other, that's obviously the redundancy layer. No, it's the physical layer. The physical layer is the one we're looking at, layer 1. Anytime we're talking about the physical layer, we often think about it as a physical thing, like as a cable or fiber, which is not a bad way to think about it, by the way. But we're really talking about the ability to get the signal from one device on the network to another device on the network. So that's where we would focus on that layer. Layer 1, the physical layer, has everything to do with crimping, wires, or anything relating to signal, because sometimes we're dealing with wireless. There is no wire that we would have to worry about to work through those. Next on our list is the one that asks us that user devices are configured with an incorrect default gateway. An incorrect default gateway. So which layer is the default gateway layer? Well, since we're talking about a default gateway, you should naturally keep in mind that that's something associated with the TCP/IP configuration, specifically an IP address, because you know when you're configuring IP addresses on your device, you add a piece that has an IP address, obviously, is the important part of it. There might be a subnet mask associated with it. And if you want to communicate to a different subnet other than your local subnet, you will need a default gateway, and you specify that default gateway as its IP address. Since we are working at that level of the network, that is our network layer, or layer 3. Layer 3, anytime we talk about an IP address, anytime we refer to a default gateway, anytime we refer to the DNS server's IP address, anytime we talk about the IP address of a device, it's always going to be OSI layer 3. Next on our list, an NGFW is blocking all SQL Server traffic. I pulled these next two entries in, and I added a little bit of extra because we want to be able to break down for us what we really believe is going to be a reference to something else in another section. So this particular question is asking you information about a device called an NGFW. So you not only have to know your OSI model, you also have to know the devices. So little combination question that comes up a lot on the exam, by the way. NGFW obviously stands for a next generation firewall, and that next generation firewall is blocking all SQL Server traffic. One of the things that's interesting about SQL Server, and specifically about next generation firewalls in general, is they can allow or block traffic based on the application itself. These are very intelligent devices that can identify traffic going across the network, regardless of port number, regardless of IP address. They can identify the actual application that is going across the network. And so the layer that we are referring to here is the application layer for layer 7. That's the one that we would use. So we've got a few that we would work through in this question. Next one is another one of these that's pulling a topic from a different part of the exam. An 802.1q trunk is connecting 8 VLANs. In the world out there of network people, we'll just say your .1q trunk is connecting 8 VLANs. You'll sometimes hear us abbreviate it that way. When we're talking about trunking, we're talking about .1q. We're talking about things that you would configure and set up on a switch. Then we are talking about the data link layer of our OSI model at layer 2. Anytime you're talking about a router or an IP address, it's layer 3. Anytime you're talking about a switch, or you're talking about bridging, or you're talking about trunking, you're talking about layer 2. So you've got a few things that you can always reference, always hold on to those that will help you decipher how you describe that particular problem. If it's a routing problem, layer 3. If it's a switching problem, layer 2. And the last OSI layer description that we have is a user has forgotten their password, that would be me, and locked their account. So in that case, it's one where we're sitting there at our screen, we type in our username, we type in allegedly our password, we hit enter, doesn't work. Well, let's try it again. Put in our username, put in our password. All of this integration, this interaction that we're doing with the application is all happening at that application layer. So it also is a layer 7 application layer description. So those are the layers that we were looking for. Transport layer, layer 4 is a web server listening on port 8080. That is that TCP port number. So that's obviously layer 4. A bad RJ45 crimp is switched pins 1 and 7. Layer 1 physical is the OSI layer associated with that one. User devices are configured with an incorrect default gateway. Since that's an IP address, it is at the network layer, or layer 3. A next generation firewall blocking SQL Server traffic is our layer 7. Layer 2 is an 802.1q trunk connecting 8 VLANs. That's all layer 2 info. And a user forgotten their password and locked their account. All happens at layer 7. So there you go. You have a little bit more information here. Now, some folks are saying in the chat room, we've got an 802.1q trunk connecting 8 VLANs. Why is that not layer 3? Because don't you need to route between those VLANs for them to communicate with each other? Well, I guess if you were routing between those VLANs, you could say the routing function is certainly occurring at layer 3, but there's no reason that you would need to connect these VLANs together if they don't need to be. So you may not be connecting them, and there's nothing about this statement that says that we're doing any type of routing between those VLANs. Those VLANs can simply be set up as 8 individual non-connected separate VLANs, maybe from different companies. So it's a good way to segment things out. And that's the segmentation part of the 802.1 queue. It's all happening at layer 2. When you see VLANs, you see switching, you see .1 queue, or you see spanning tree. Those are all switch things. Since they're all switch things, they are layer 2 to be able to do that. So those are the OSI layers and descriptions. That is your performance-based question of the month. This is, by the way, not an unusual style or form of performance-based question. You won't get all of your performance-based questions in this format, but they are certainly very apt, very common to provide you with a set of questions that might be matching. They might be putting in a particular order, or they might be a fill-in-the-blank, sort of like this one, maybe even a drag and drop. This is sort of like taking 6 different multiple choice questions and combining them up into one single question. And you might want to think about that as you decide your study and your timing on the exam, because this might take you a little bit more time than a simple multiple choice question. Let's now move back to our multiple choice questions and see how you do with this next one. It asks, a network administrator would like to decrease the time required for nightly backups. Which of the following would be the best choice for this task? Would we enable jumbo frames, add radius authentication, disable spanning tree, increase the ARP cache time, or specify an FHRP address? Got a lot to choose from here. Let's see if you know what the answer is. If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. The question again asks, a network administrator would like to decrease the time required for nightly backups. Which of the following would be the best choice for this task? Would it be to enable jumbo frames, add radius authentication, disable spanning tree, increase the ARP cache time, or specify or have a specific an FHRP address? You can tell I wrote these, can't you? You can tell I wrote these and then missed it when I copied them over, and missed it again when I added it into the Vevox, and missed it again as I got it ready today. So here we are. That's the beauty of a live stream, though, that we can stumble over all of these things, but I think we knew what we were talking about. That one's not too horrible of a typo on my screen. And we can certainly step through those as well. This might be a good one to think about too. I have this problem in my studio, by the way, with backups, because I store these large video files. So today we'll do this live stream, and the results of this live stream will probably be about 500 gigabytes of data, because I am not storing it as raw video files. That would be a little bit crazy these days. There's some great compression algorithms that are used. And I store them into a delicately compressed format on my storage drives. But occasionally I need to back those up, and it does take time. So I would like to decrease the time. Everybody would like to decrease the time required for their nightly backups. Maybe you can use one of these techniques if you happen to know what it is. Let's see how you did with this one. The question again asks, a network administrator would like to decrease the time required for nightly backups. Which of the following would be the best choice for this task? Would it be to enable jumbo frames, add radius authentication, disable spanning tree, increase the ARP cache time, or specify an FHRP address? What did you choose? Let's find out. We're going to stop our poll and see what you chose. 65% of you said you would enable jumbo frames. It drops way off after that. 16% of you say to increase the ARP cache time. 10% say to specify an FHRP address. 7% of you said to disable spanning tree, and 1% said to add radius authentication. The answer in this case, not too much unexpected, considering how many people answered that one, is the answer you see here: enable jumbo frames. That is exactly the answer that we were looking for, and maybe that gives you some ideas of things that you can look at or work on with jumbo frames. Jumbo frames are pretty awesome because they allow you to take what is a relatively small payload size in Ethernet. It was super big back in the day, but as our networks have become faster, as the amount of traffic we've sent over these networks has increased, we needed to increase the total size of a single Ethernet frame past that very limiting amount of 1500 bytes. So instead of having that 1500 bytes and having to send multiple frames across the network, you can now have much larger frames, all the way up to 9,216 bytes of a maximum transmission unit. That's a pretty big amount. So we're increasing this 6 times plus is the amount of space we can now fit into a single Ethernet frame, which means we can get rid of 6 times the overhead as we are transferring very large documents across the network, and certainly speeding up the process of performing backups, because those are effectively taking very large amounts of data and transferring them across the network. If you ever go to configure jumbo frames, you'll notice that an accepted default, and in fact, it may even be locked in to the type of system that you're using. This is the one on my Mac. Let me zoom up just a bit. My Mac even says, oh, if you're setting it, set it between 1280 and 9000. So 9000 is the max on there, because they are not counting that extra 16 bytes left in the rest of that frame, because there are still headers and footers and other things inside of the frame we have to deal with. The 9000 is referring to how much of the data we are fitting inside of that frame. So this is really useful to be able to set up and speed things up on your network. So you can now send the same amount of data with fewer frames, with fewer packets. So you can get the information across the network that much faster. The routers don't have to route as much. The switches don't have to switch as much, because they have to make their forwarding decisions right at the beginning of that data. And if we have to send 10 frames through the network instead of 4 frames through the network, it's so much more efficient to have that there. So why aren't we doing this everywhere? Let's just turn on jumbo everywhere we go. And this is the problem, of course, is that to have jumbo frames work properly, you have to make sure that all of your routers, all of your switches, all of your network devices are able to communicate with these jumbo frames. Not all networks are. I used to have a problem on Comcast's network, which I am not on any longer, where if I set a jumbo frame of 9000 so I could do backups, it would not be able to resolve anything properly with DNS. There were a couple of things they were doing on the back end that were preventing that from happening. And now that I'm on a different network, everything works lovely. Everything is going along swimmingly with my 9000 MTU setting for jumbo frames. Might be something you want to try. Might be able to increase throughput of your backups. Will not help you with very standardized web browsing type things. It really is not going to help you for email, but if you're transferring very large documents across the network, jumbo frames can be very, very useful. That is the answer to this question, jumbo frames. You can find this in my N10-009 course under section 2.2. The video name is Interface Configurations. Now, what about these other things that are in here, though? Can't they speed up the network? Let's look at them. 16% of you said to increase the ARP cache time. This means that we're going to keep in our ARP cache, which is on our local machine, this list of all the IP addresses and MAC addresses associated with those IP addresses. That's what an ARP cache holds in it. And by default, your ARP cache is going to be active for 5-10 minutes. It depends on how your operating system is configured. And once those IP addresses and MAC address resolutions drop out of your cache, it has to perform a separate ARP to be able to receive those again. This is only happening once every 5 minutes, once every 10 minutes. So this is not something that's going to have any type of effect on the overall throughput of your system. The only thing it might be able to do is decrease the number of total DNS requests that you make across your network at a particular time frame, during a particular span of time. So it has nothing to do with increasing or decreasing time required to transfer files through the network. So it would not be increasing cache time of your ARP cache. Not going to help you with throughput. Having an FHRP address. So if you're doing any type of redundancy on your network, you're working through any of the details of having multiple routers and keeping those routers always working. And if one router fails, can we use the other router as a redundant? First hop routing protocol is one of the types of protocols that provide some of that functionality, but having a redundant set of routers on your network does not increase the overall throughput of the traffic going over your network. It simply makes it more resilient. So if you happen to lose a router, if that router fails, the power supply fails, there's a bug in the software, it glitches out and it drops off the network, we have a redundant router right there and able to go, but it doesn't increase throughput. So it would not be specifying an FHRP address. 7% of you said disable spanning tree. Do not disable your spanning tree. Does not make things go faster. Doesn't make things go slower. It is a way to protect your network from network loops at layer 2. We know that's the switching layer, right? The data link layer. So we want to be sure that we are always protected against somebody accidentally plugging in a switch into itself. That's effectively how we create these loops. And spanning tree prevents those loops from causing outages and downtime on your network. So disabling spanning tree, although you would think we're disabling something, that means something else can go faster. Nope, that's not the way it works. So it's not going to make anything go faster by simply disabling spanning tree. And lastly, 1% said add radius authentication. Well, authentication is always a good idea, and having a separate authentication server can certainly help with that, but that's just making your network more secure. It's not setting up anything relating to make your network go faster with file transfers. All it's going to do is allow you to have a centralized database for your usernames and passwords, which, as we all know, has nothing to do with overall throughput of your network. Therefore, the only answer that really makes any sense is the one that 65% of you chose: enable jumbo frames. That is the correct answer. Let's do another one, shall we? Next one on our list is this one that asks, the in-band IP address of a network switch is not responding to SSH requests. Which of the following would be the best way to proceed? Would we configure a failover switch, use a fiber connection to the switch, change the default DNS server, connect a serial cable to the switch console, or check the documentation for MFA? Which one is it? If you think you know the answer, there's your link, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your question, lock in your answer to the question. And that is where you could put your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. We will keep all those hints and answers right out of the chat. So folks, we're talking in the previous question, wouldn't spanning tree just be enabled by default? On many switches, it is, but there are certainly other switches that you might run into where spanning tree is not configured by default, assuming it's even available on that switch. Not all switches have the ability to support spanning tree. Usually non-managed switches, those are the less smart switches. We don't want to call them dumb switches. They're just not as smart. They're struggling. They're trying to keep up. We need a managed switch, something with more capabilities to be able to do spanning tree. So that's one of those where if you have the option, it should be turned on. I would hope that it would be on by default, but if it isn't, turn it on. If it is on by default, do not turn it off. Always run spanning tree and you'll be fine. You should be able to set up spanning tree so that it works seamlessly on your network. Make sure you understand how it works and how you would configure it if you have multiple switches. That might help you as well. A lot of people answered this one. I wonder if some of you have been in this situation before. I know I have. This question asks, the in-band IP address of a network switch is not responding to SSH requests. Which of the following would be the best way to proceed? Would it be to configure a failover switch, use a fiber connection to the switch, change the default DNS server, connect a serial cable to the switch console, or check the documentation for MFA? I can't wait to see what you chose. Let's stop the poll and see how you did with this one. Again, big numbers. And again, 65% of you say connect a serial cable to the switch console. But we were not so sure this time because we have other two-digit. 17% said to change the default DNS server. 14% said to configure a failover switch. 3% of you said to check the documentation for multi-factor authentication. And 1% of you said to use a fiber connection to the switch. This is a case where in-band communication to a device means that we are communicating to it over the normal network connection. So anytime you are performing an SSH into a device, you're pinging it, you're accessing a web server, all of these are being done in band. You're using the available network to be able to communicate to those devices. And if you're in one location and you're trying to communicate with a router, switch, or other device in another location, you need to find out what IP address has been configured on that device and then try to SSH into that device using that IP address. But sometimes SSH fails. Sometimes somebody forgot to turn on SSH and you would not be able to communicate to that device over SSH. Well, how am I supposed to manage the switch? How am I supposed to get into the configuration of the switch and make a change if I can't communicate into that device using SSH? Well, that is why if you look at your switch, your router, your firewall, your proxy, or whatever device you have connected to the network, you'll probably see on that device is an interface marked console. Now, this might be a 9-pin serial connection. It might be like the one here where it's an RJ45. It looks just like an Ethernet interface, but it says console. It is clearly not Ethernet to be able to use this. It is instead a serial connection. If you look at the most common modern devices, I'm not sure I have a switch or picture of one on here. There is one in the course, I believe. Some of the newer switches just have a USB interface right on the front of them. That's now our very common and most common type of serial connection that we would use is over USB. So a lot of the newer devices just have a Type A or in some cases a Type C connection into those devices. This gives you a terminal connection. It looks exactly the same as if you were to SSH into the device. So you're using a console over a serial connection. And if you are needing a USB connection, or maybe all you have is USB and you need to connect to this serial, you might need an adapter that will convert between USB and a serial stream, such as a connection that might fit on a DB9 or even one like this console connection here. These are not Ethernet. So you might have an Ethernet connection. In fact, here is a 10/100/1000 management interface. That is the in-band management. And then right next to it is a console connection. That is the out-of-band management. So you can see both of those are connected right next to each other on the switch. This is the one that we posed in this question is not available to us. Maybe somebody pulled the cable. Maybe SSH isn't working on that switch for some reason. That would be relatively unusual, but something that certainly could happen. The problem with the console, of course, in a serial connection is you need to plug into it to use it. So you would either need to be in the room or you would need to connect some type of serial connection server that you would then connect to using an IP address. So you would SSH into your serial server, maybe even a jump server, to then be able to connect to the serial connection on the switch. So that is the answer that we were looking for. If we look at the answers, 65% of you said to connect a serial cable to the switch console. That is exactly what we would do to make that happen. 14% of you said configure a failover switch, which could keep your network up and running if there was a problem, but it would not allow you to get access to the switch that was not responding. So maybe good for uptime, but bad for managing. We have 17% that said change the default DNS server. Since we're connecting to this device over an IP address, DNS is not part of this equation. We are not performing any type of DNS lookup. We're accessing this device directly over IP address. Therefore, it can't be a DNS problem. What? We finally found one that can't be a DNS issue. Certainly. 3% of you said check the documentation for multi-factor authentication. In this case, we're not getting any information, any messages back from that device, back from that network switch with SSH. So we aren't even able to log in with a regular username and password, much less anything that requires multi-factor authentication. And then lastly, 1% of you said use a fiber connection for the switch. If our problem was related to interference, if our problem was related to distance and getting a signal over the network from a long distance away, maybe fiber would be the right answer. But in this case, we're not getting any connection, whether you're going to connect over fiber, copper, or any other network connection into that switch. You're not going to be able to access it because SSH itself is not responding. So it would not be fiber connections aren't going to save you in this particular case. In this case, the only answer that makes any sense is the one where we would connect directly to the console port, and we would use our serial connection to be able to do that. Certainly one of the important things. By the way, those console connections, somebody's asking about this in the chat. The console connection that's here doesn't require any additional setup, really. It will have a default configuration that is always turned on. So it doesn't matter how you've configured it. Now, there are some configuration settings that many of these devices will allow you to set. For example, they may allow you to set the bit rate. Normally, these connections might run at 9600 bits per second, or it might run at 14.4, might run at 119K, or whatever that very high number is. And you may have to adjust on your side. Most of the console serial connections you will use on your device will automatically negotiate that when you connect to it, so that you might see some garbage when you first hit the enter key a couple times, and then suddenly you get a login prompt, or it figures out the speed and adjusts for you. But there are ways to manually do that part as well. The answer here, connect serial cable, that's the one we were looking for. Now, we've already talked about OSI, we've already talked about serial cables, we've already talked about many aspects of the things that are in the exam itself. And of course, my video course goes topic by topic, objective by objective through the entire set of official CompTIA exam objectives. I cover every single topic that CompTIA has asked you to know about, and in fact, they stay very, very close to that set. Of course, there's a lot of videos in this course, 87 videos over 12 hours of content covering all of the topics, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of topics that are in these exam objectives. I would love for you to be able to watch every video, but if you're not able to, I have taken the information from every video and I put them into a set of course notes. These course notes are available in both a physical version that I'm holding in my hand. You can see the sheets of paper that were taken from a tree that we created, and then we planted a new tree so we can do it again. We just have one tree. So I do one of these at a time. So this is a way that you can get your hands on this information in a printed form, but there's also this digital form. We have it right here. You've got a list of these. So all of the text, all the important charts, all the important graphics, they are in this list of course notes. That might be something that can help you with your studies. And if you think it is, it's another great way to also support what we do here. You can find out more about these course notes on our website. Go to professormesser.com/NPCN for the Network Plus course notes. That's where that came from. Or you can follow the main menu at the top of the Professor Messer website. If you're accessing it from your mobile, it is in the hamburger menu of the Professor Messer website. That's where you would find the main menu. So let's now do another question, shall we? I've got another one here. This next question for you asks, which of the following would be the best choice for authenticating to a web-based application? Would it be OSPF, SAML, WPA, DNSSEC, or PSK? A lot to choose from here. Which of the following would be the best choice for authenticating to a web-based application? Would it be OSPF, SAML, WPA, DNSSEC, PSK? Yes, I did write you a question where you had to know all the acronyms. That was part of it. But like most things, as I mentioned, you not only have to know what the acronyms are, you have to know how those acronyms are used, which is really the most important part. So that's why I make questions like this, because it's very similar to the style and tone as the questions on the actual exam. Fortunately, this one, if you know your acronyms, this one relatively straightforward. I could have made this one a bit harder, but I did not make it quite as difficult as it could have been. We have quite a few acronyms on the Network Plus exam. I thought this would be a good way to test ourselves with how these acronyms are working, how they're doing for us. See how you do with this one. A lot of people putting in their answers quickly on this one. So I'm wondering if we really do know the answer to this one pretty well. Lock in, got a few extra seconds. Lock in your answer. Go to professormesser.com/QA. Pick one of these, lock it in, and let's see how we did. The question again asks, which of the following would be the best choice for authenticating to a web-based application? Would it be OSPF, SAML, WPA, DNSSEC, or PSK? What did you answer? I can't wait to see. We're going to close the poll And we'll see that 61%, a very big number, say the answer is SAML, S-A-M-L. We have 18% that say the answer is DNSSEC. We also have 9% that say WPA, 6% that say PSK, and 7% that say OSPF. What's interesting about this question is I really tried to focus on the security part of this. So 4 of these 5 questions do have a security component associated with them. Only one of these doesn't, and that was OSPF, open shortest path first. But let's talk about this very large number, the 61% of you that say SAML. Yeah, you got that one right. That is the answer that we were looking for. The security assertion markup language, SAML. This is a very standardized way to provide authentication and authorization for an application. It is one that we started doing with web-based applications. It works very, very well with those web-based apps. The problem is when you start using multiple devices simultaneously, like a mobile app, and then you want to use the web app at the same time, it doesn't work very seamlessly across both of those. It wasn't designed to work seamlessly across both of those. But that is one thing that people keep in mind. There are other ways to provide authentication without using SAML for those people and applications that need to do that. But you will find plenty of web-based applications out there that are using SAML as the authentication and authorization method to be able to get people logged in properly on that connection. So that is the answer we were looking for here. And that's why I specified in the question that this was a web-based application to kind of get you thinking that direction with the final answer, or maybe lock into your mind when you answer this question. That was the only one of these options that had anything to do with authenticating to an application was SAML. So you should have seen that one pop up, and it should have been the obvious response for most of us. But almost all of these other answers have a security component, and that's what could throw a number of you off. 18% said DNSSEC, which is a secure way to perform DNS queries to that DNS server. As many of you know, the default for DNS is to communicate with no type of encryption in the clear across the network. And if somebody was capturing this data, they may not know exactly which URL you are visiting on a particular site, but they could see all of the name resolutions that you're doing. So they know, oh, you went to Yahoo. Oh, you went to Google. Oh, you went to ESPN. Oh, you went to ProfessorMesser.com. And they know that you did that because you had to perform a DNS query to get the IP address to know where to go. And it's another way that the attackers and the bad guys can compile information about what happens to be going on, even if all of the other communication is encrypted. So this is one, DNSSEC is a way to prevent that. It's a secure way, that's the SEC part at the end of DNS, that allows us to communicate securely to a DNS server. So it's a nice feature, but has nothing to do with authenticating to an application. Next on our list, 9% said WPA, that wired protective or wired type of protection privacy on a wireless network has always been a focus of our 802.11 configurations. We want the same type of security on a wireless network as we have on wired. And if you want to have WPA encryption on your wireless network, that means all of the wireless communication, except for some control and management purposes, will all be encrypted. So WPA is that wireless encryption protocol that you would use, but doesn't help you with authenticating to a web-based application. Has nothing to do with authenticating to web-based applications. We also have 7% of you that said OSPF, the open shortest path first. Open shortest path first is a dynamic routing protocol primarily used interior gateway protocol, something within our own network. It's not one that we commonly use when communicating outside of our local network, but very common to use, especially within a single autonomous system. That is one that is very useful for routing. Make sure your network is up and running and can dynamically adjust the routing tables depending on the state of the network, but has nothing to do with authenticating to a web-based application. And then lastly, PSK, a shared key on a network, especially at your home, is probably the way that you do it. When people come to your network and go, oh, what's the password of your wireless network? Oh, it's Ninja 1, it's Football 2, it's whatever you're using as your pre-shared key or PSK. That is, again, a great way to protect your wireless network. an okay way to protect your wireless network, but it is, or it has nothing to do with authenticating to a web-based application. The only answer here that made any sense was indeed SAML. SAML was the answer that we were looking for, and that is the one you should have chosen. It's from my N10-009 course, section 4.1, under the authentication video. That's the one you'll want to watch for that. Let's do another question, shall we? We've got more questions. Can there be more acronyms? Of course there can. Thank you for asking. I have more acronyms for you. This one is a question that asks, a laptop has received an API-IPA address, but the DHCP server is operational and responds to pings. Which of the following is the most likely reason for this issue? Would it be 802.1x authentication required, pool exhaustion, gateway of last resort not configured, duplicate IP address on the local subnet, or the DHCP server needs a static route? If you think you know the answer, you can answer it using the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. That is where you can participate and answer any of these questions. Just stay on that page and it will update as I click the buttons on the side. The question again asks, a laptop has received an API-IPA address, but the DHCP server is operational and responds to pings. Which of the following is the most likely reason for this issue? Is it 802.1x authentication required, pool exhaustion, gateway of last resort not configured, duplicate IP address on the local subnet, or the DHCP server needs a static route? Which one is it? Do you think you know? Lock in your answer. Use the link on your screen. Figure out which one of these it happens to be. This is one where it is kind of nice to know what the abbreviations are in this case, but I don't think it's critical if you happen to know what those abbreviations do. By the way, that tends to be the default for the way that we work with these abbreviations. We very often forget what they mean as well. We don't remember the words sometimes. You just say, oh, this laptop has an API-IPA address, and everyone knows exactly what you're talking about. But if you ask somebody, okay, what does API-IPA stand for? Oh, hold on. I got it. Stands for, no, it's, the A is for Apple. No, that's not right. And so we got to stop for a moment and think about what it is, because we've just gotten so accustomed to using the abbreviation. It's very common for that to happen. And so this question sort of taps into that side of things where I don't want to know what it means. I just want to know how to fix it. So another good example of where we are. Let's see how we did with this one. The question asks, a laptop has received an API-IPA address, but the DHCP server is operational and it responds to pings. Which of the following is the most likely reason for this issue? Is it 802.1x authentication required, pool exhaustion, gateway of last resort not configured, duplicate IP address on the local subnet, or the DHCP server needs a static route? Which one did you choose? Let's find out. We will click the close poll button, and we did okay on this one because we did have a majority of you choose an answer, but is it the right answer? 52% of you say pool exhaustion. Then we have 21% that say a duplicate IP address is on the local subnet. 10% say the DHCP server needs a static route. We have 9% that said a gateway of last resort is not configured. And 7% say an 802.1x authentication is required. Well, as many of you are probably familiar, being able to get a private IP address automatically is the goal behind API-IPA. It is a way to give your machine an IP address that can at least communicate on the local subnet. These automatic private IP addresses are not able to communicate outside of the local subnet. We refer to these as link local addresses because they can only communicate on your local link, not across any other subnets. We also have the situation in this case that we shouldn't be getting API-IPA addresses. The only reason you would be assigned an API-IPA address is if you have not manually configured an IP address on your machine, which you probably should not be doing, and you've not received an API-PA, or you've not received a non-API-PA address from your DHCP server. The DHCP server should be assigning IP addresses. The DHCP server is up and running. If you ping it, it responds to pings. So what's going on? If we have a DHCP server, why didn't it give me an IP address? Why is it leaving me out? Why am I left out? Why am I feeling self-conscious about myself? Well, let's go through our list. 52% of you said the pool is exhausted. This pool is exhausting. So if you get an API-PA address and your DHCP server is up and running, it's very possible that the list of available IP addresses that are put inside of your DHCP server, we refer to this as a pool of addresses, is out of addresses. It has no more to give out. Let's say that the pool had 100 addresses in it, and you're the 101st person to connect to the network. You're not going to get an IP address. We've already handed out 100 addresses. There are no more left. I'm looking. There's no more. I can't find it. Nope. Pool's empty. No more addresses. We're done. There are none available there. One thing that might help is to lower the lease time so that when you assign an IP address, you can get that IP address back a little bit quicker if somebody happens to leave the network abruptly. Normally, it handles that process very well, but very, very good example of where you might run into problems, or maybe just have too small of a pool. Maybe your pool is 20 IP addresses in the pool, but there's 50 people in the office. You need some more IP addresses in your DHCP pool. But given the scenario here where we got a private IP address, we got a link local address, but the DHCP server's fine, that means our problem isn't with the function of the DHCP server. Our problem is with the configuration of the DHCP server. That's where the issue might be. So our pool of available IP addresses no longer exists. It is exhausted. We have used them all up. That is the 52% of you that chose that answer, and that is the correct answer that we were looking for. 21% of you said there's a duplicate IP address on the local subnet. Well, a duplicate IP address would tell you there was a duplicate IP address. There would be a different set of things, and you would at least have an IP address. If you got a duplicate, at least we knew the DHCP server was working to some degree. API-PA addresses aren't provided if there happens to be a duplicate. If anything, it will tell you you don't have anything. You're not getting an IP address because there happens to be a duplicate, but we have this set up for grabbing an IP address from the DHCP server, so we can't have a duplicate in that scenario. So it would not be the one that we were looking for. It would certainly not be the most likely reason for this particular issue. It could certainly cause issues, and in the right scenario with the right duplicate IP addresses configured in a right way, and we happen to receive the ARP the first time and the secondary ARP second, there are ways that that could cause a problem that would be similar to what we are seeing, but it's very unlikely. And because it is unlikely, it does not fit into our question that asks us for the most likely reason, which very clearly is we're just out of IP addresses, which, by the way, happens all the time. Not a big deal. We'll just add some more to our pool. 10% of you said the DHCP server needs a static route. Well, it might, but that has nothing to do with our DHCP server not working properly. And we know it's not a routing problem. How do we know it's not a routing problem? Because we can ping it. We can ping it, which means we were able to route IP traffic to that device. And perhaps even more importantly, we were able to route traffic back to our device. So that's another thing that I think we sometimes miss when we are troubleshooting routing problems on our network. I know we're sort of getting off the topic of this question, but if you are in a position where you've set up some new routers, some new layer 3 connections on your network, and you're not getting the access through the network that you were expecting, you not only need to check that the routing tables work in one direction, you have to make sure those routing tables are also working in the other direction, because routing tables aren't stateful. They don't know that you already sent traffic one way, so they'll just send it back the same direction. Routing tables look at traffic going one direction, and then they reevaluate when that traffic is coming back the other direction. That's because very often you might have traffic go one route to get to a device and a completely different route to get back, because the routing tables are a bit different depending on which direction you are going. So another one of those helpful tricks that might help you if you're troubleshooting routing problems. check your routes in both directions. It will save you a lot of time when you realize you didn't do that. Why am I saying that? Yes, because I've done that before. So I'm helping. I'm saving you some time. You can learn from the problems that I have run into in the past. 9% said the gateway of last resort was not configured. Well, in this case, we know the gateway of last resort is not configured on our local machine because we don't have an IP address yet. And if we're worried that it's not configured properly on a local router or not configured properly on the DHCP server, we know that's not the issue, again, because we were able to ping it. And then lastly, we have 7% that said 802.1x authentication required. That X there is not holding a space. That's the actual name of the standard, 802.1x, capital X, most importantly, which designates it as a standalone standard that you need to know. That is a method that we can use to protect our networks by requiring authentication before you're able to send traffic across that network. The only thing that does not apply to this, of course, however, is getting an IP address. We don't limit someone from obtaining an IP address on our network because if we don't have an IP address, we can't authenticate. So it definitely is a chicken and egg type issue. We have to allow the eggs to hatch so that we can communicate on the network. I'm not sure that made sense. we took that metaphor a little bit too far, but you have to make sure you're given an IP address so that you can then 802.1x authenticate. So one has to occur first, which is why we do not limit the ability for DHCP to work so that later on we can then authenticate properly to the network. That's what we were focusing on with that question. 52% of you said the answer is pool exhaustion, and that is the answer that we were looking for in this example. Well, we have already quickly come to the last step, the last part of our study group today. We've already gone through an hour of Q&A, but don't worry, we got another hour of questions and answers, except we're doing it a different way in the after show where you ask me the questions. Stick around for that to be able to go through those pieces. All the questions we looked at today, by the way, came directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. If you do not have a copy of these objectives, they are very, very useful to have. They've recently rearranged where these objectives are on the CompTIA website. One of the things I could do, crazy, I know, is to go through the process of showing you where you could find those. So if you go to the CompTIA website now, they're in a little bit of different place. The website looks very different when you go to CompTIA.org. But if you go to the certifications pull down, you can see all of the certifications that are supported by CompTIA. Since we're talking Network Plus today, I'm going to go down to the Network Plus. I'm going to click the Learn More. And one of the options that comes up is one that gives us this little sub-menu on the screen between Overview, Buy Now, Career Path, and Resources. You can see a very quick overview of the resources there, but at the very bottom has a link to download exam objectives. You don't have to put anything extra in. If you want the latest version of objectives, you just click those. They'll show them to you on the screen. There they are. So there's your objectives. That's how easy it is to get your hands on these objectives. Look at all of this information that's here. Make these a little bit bigger so you can see these as I scroll through them. So much here that is available. So make sure you are aware of all of these objectives. This is everything you need to know for the exam. This is a great checklist to be able to work through all of those. So make sure you have a look at what the options are, that you're familiar with all of these objectives, and you know how to apply these technologies in a real world perspective. Those are the exam objectives. They are an incredibly valuable tool. You'll notice that as you go through my videos, they are matching the exam objectives bullet by bullet by bullet. That is the reason for doing that. So I want to be sure that my videos match this set of objectives exactly, and in fact, they really do. I am going to show you also that we do one of these study groups every month, but I can tell you, even as early as today, this schedule has changed dramatically. So I think we will still be keeping our 5th and our 7th for A+ in August. We, of course, have our Security Plus study group next week at this time here in July. So we're not done with July yet. But as we're looking forward to August, I had previously set August 13th as being when we will do our next Network Plus study group. It's probably going to get pushed 2 weeks into the last week of the month. I don't have the specifics yet, but I will be updating it later today. just to let you know that these times and these schedules can sometimes change. One of the best ways to know when our next live event is going to be is to go to professormesser.com/calendar. When I make the change, it is updated there, the first, and then I update our events channel on our Discord also at the same time. So either one of those will get you the latest set of exam objective or the latest set of live stream events and when we schedule them. And when I move these around in August, and you'll probably see this happen later today, whenever I'm able to really lock in what these dates are, you'll see them updated on the calendar. You might even be watching this months after I do it. You're wondering, when's the next live event going to be? professormesser.com/calendar. Best way to do it, best way to find out what we are doing, when we are doing it, and where you can find the links online to join us. Well, we've gone through an hour of Q&A already. I can't believe it, but there's more to come in the after show. Stay exactly where you are. You can also submit questions at any time using the same link we've been using this whole time, professormesser.com/QA. You can, of course, find our downloadable videos, our course notes, and more on our website, professormesser.com/netsuccess. We also have our set of discounted vouchers on our website, professormesser.com/vouchers. Great way to do it if you're in the U.S., Canada, or a U.S. territory. And of course, if you're on social media, just type in professormesser.com/ the name of the site you would like to find us on, /Discord, /Facebook, /YouTube, /LinkedIn, /X, /Twitter, whatever it happens to be, we will find it and you will find us. It's all out there. And if we're not there, let us know. We probably need to get onto the social media site that you're on. I would love to be able to do that. It's a great way to find us and find out what we are doing, and a great way to get our daily and weekly pop quiz questions. Well, that brings us to the end of our first hour. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your questions and answers that we've had. We have more coming in the next hour. Stick around for that. But in the meantime, I want to thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. Okay. We will get a sip there. Let's adjust our cameras. Let's turn off all the little individual pictures of me in all of these cameras, and let's get rid of the graphic, and I think we're in good shape. How about that? We went through a lot of questions in that first hour, went through a lot of analysis of the questions, but now we turn this entire boat around a little bit. Instead of me asking you the questions, it's your chance to ask me the questions. This is the part of the study group we refer to as our after show. The after show provides you with a way to submit any questions at any time. In fact, I have up on the screen, I'm working to get up on the screen. There we go. The details of this. You can indeed submit questions for this particular part of the study group at any time. I will be moderating these questions in real time, behind the scenes, all by myself. So your contribution, not only may not appear immediately, it will not appear immediately. I'm going to sift through these as we go through them to find questions that are insightful, that are common, that are things other people might want to know and be able to work through. So let's see if I can sift through the questions that you are submitting. Simply go to the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to be able to do that. There are a lot of great questions that have come in already. Let's start with one where we have some of this is also a very, very common question, a great question to start with. This is from my very good friend, Anonymous, who says, are we expected to memorize the different Wi-Fi generations and the IEEE standard and the speeds and the frequencies and the bandwidths? And I think you see where that's going. And a very common question and a good question from Anonymous. Well, I'm probably messing up your name there, but that's certainly one that we could sift through and figure out the details of. This is one that we can go. I was flipping through my screens here because I want to find a copy of the exam objectives. Then I realized I had a copy already up here that we could flip over to. There it is. So the best way to know what you should memorize for the exam is the official set of objectives. I'm probably one version behind. They updated their logos recently. So they didn't really change the objectives. They just changed the logos that are on the objectives. Whatever's in the objectives that are clearly and plainly spelled out are things that CompTIA wants you to memorize, wants you to know. So for example, section 1.4, explain common networking ports, protocols, services, and traffic types. If they have listed file transfer protocol, FTP, and they literally write out port 20 and port 21, you don't have to ask the question. But I still get it. People say, do I need to memorize all of these protocols and all of these ports? Yes, yes, you do, because they listed them in their set of exam objectives. Now, what's nice about this, if there's a nice part about rote memorization, is they tell you exactly what you need to know, and that's it. They do not go outside of this list on the exam, nor should they need to, because you've now memorized 20-something port numbers. A lot of these you probably know already, but this is a really good example of if that's the detail that's in the exam objectives, that's the detail you need to know, and probably a little bit more. Because not only do you need to know the ports, the protocols, the services, and the traffic types, you need to know what they do, because you might get a question about it. So the question we have was about wireless, was about wireless connections, wireless standards specifically. So as we go to section 2.3, I know my head's in the way. So here's section 2.3. And you can see that I'm going to actually bring up another set of exam objectives just so you can appreciate the differences. Let me step through this. So I'm going to pull up not just my N10-009 objectives, I'm going to bring up some previous objectives from the N10-008 just for clarity, just so you can appreciate the differences. So if you were studying the previous standard for Network Plus, that would be the N10-008. It's no longer a valid exam version. It has been retired. So what you see on the screen are not objectives associated with the latest version of the A+ or the Network Plus exam. But you'll notice in section 2.4, given a scenario, install and configure the appropriate wireless standards and technologies. They provide you with a section that says 802.11 standards, A, B, G, N, AC, and AX. They just list it out. They are well listed all the way back to version A. Now, if you go to, I don't know, any network anywhere, you're probably not going to see an 802.11a. You're probably not going to see an 802.11b. You're probably not going to see an 802.11g. You might see some N devices out there. Now, because of that, CompTIA changed things on this latest version of this for understanding that the numbers are a little bit different. And some of the way that they describe this section is a little bit different, but the section has changed a bit. It says, given a scenario, select and configure wireless devices and technologies. So they really made quite a change between the previous version and this version in its tone, in its style, in the detail of things you need to know. For example, you notice they want you to know what channels are. They want you to know what frequency options are available. They want you to know service set identifiers and other information. But they really don't go into a lot of detail about specific wireless standards in that section. There's just not a lot to go through. They really took out a lot of that rote memorization. And why would you need to know anything about 802.11a at this point? You're never going to run into it. It doesn't really have any connection to what we're doing on today's networks. It really isn't useful even for understanding the latest wireless standards. You just need to know the current standards. A good point, Chris asked in the chat room, what if I'm a time traveler? Maybe you should probably be looking more at history. I don't think technology history is where you should be focusing on. There are probably more critical things associated with that. So when we're talking about, do I need to know this? Do I need to know that? Do I need to know this other thing? We really are trying to focus on what is in the exam objectives. What is in that list? So This is one where you always go back to the objectives, and you will see in the objectives, yeah, you don't need to know. You don't need to know that information. It's not listed there. It's not something the exam will dwell on. Now you might, and this comes up also, some people will often say, yeah, but I'm working on a network that's really old, or I'm transferring out some information, and I found one of these old access points still running. You might run into that. But as far as the exam is concerned, that's not a priority. It would be relatively unusual to run into that anyway. So the answer is no. The very long answer to that question is no. You don't need to know that, but you do need to know what is listed in the exam objectives. Make sure you get the latest set of objectives, and make sure they match the version of the exam that you plan to take. Because eventually a new version of the Network Plus exam will be released in 2 years, and you might be watching this video 2 years from now. Make sure you download the version of the exam objectives that match the version of the exam that you're taking, because there are differences as we move between these different versions, and that's just one of many examples. I keep a very detailed set of spreadsheets with a bullet-by-bullet breakdown that tells me, is this something new in the latest version? And if it's the old objectives, I find out if it's been removed from the latest version. So all of this is important things to know. Let's keep going through this list of things that you have here. Thank you for submitting these questions. You can submit a question into this mix at professormesser.com/QA to be able to make that work. So let's keep going on this and be able to focus on all of those. Here's one that's more of a question about addressing. So let's even look at how this might work. This is one, when we start looking at IP addresses, it almost becomes overwhelming when we look at IPv6. We've been so accustomed to IPv4. It's just 4 numbers with dots in the middle. It's between 0 and 255. There's a little bit of math involved, and there's a little bit of subnetting things you have to do and shortcuts, but it's relatively manageable. And then you see IPv6, which is massive. It's enormous. There are thousands and thousands of addresses that a single individual on the planet Earth could have, and you would still have plenty of addresses available. And so Manuel asks, if there's such an excessive number for available IPv6, is there any reason manufacturers couldn't just ship devices with hard-coded IPv6 addresses, just like they do for MAC addresses? It seems like that would make sense. Seems like that would be a nice shortcut. And there are a couple of ways this is addressed, but we don't hard-code IPv6 because we still have subnets. And the manufacturer of the device that is shipping this to you doesn't know what IPv6 subnets are on your network. So although there are a plethora, a cornucopia of IPv6 addresses, they are still specific to your subnet. So that's why if you're somebody who is working on a network with IPv6, still has to use that. But I'll also say there are ways with IPv6 where you could have these devices automatically create their own IPv6 address. Slack is a very good example of that, where it's able to create its own IPv6 address that has not been administratively assigned to the device based on what network it's connecting to. So it's sort of the similar thing. You're sort of getting that automation or the ability to set IPv6 addresses on these devices without having to directly manage them. And you can do that using Slack and a couple of DHCP type functions on your network, DHCP version 6, to go along with IP version 6, of course. So that is where I would focus my efforts for learning those things. I do have a section in the video that talks about Slack. They pulled back a lot of their IPv6 specifics in the 009 version. If you're really big into IPv6, you might even go back and look at some of the things we did for the N10-008. We went into just a little bit more detail, not a lot. But that's another one of those places where it's now it is a bit outside the scope. There are some IPv6 specific topics on the N10-009 exam. Make sure you're familiar with them. That's something that might pop up that you might need to know about as well. Let's keep going through this list. We talked in the earlier on this connection, we were discussing different ways to connect to the network and things that we were creating. I'm going to go through this list here. When people get into those specifics and learning everything they need to know for the exam, it's very overwhelming at first. I really recommend going into the objectives and really focusing on one objective after another. And that is something I definitely think of when I see this message from Big Chuck, not to be confused with Middle Chuck or Little Chuck, but Big Chuck has sent in this question that asks, I've watched all the videos and taken notes on each video, but I'm not doing super well on my practice tests, getting around 50 to 70% depending on the topic. I have to agree with Big Chuck here. We're a little bit low. So Big Chuck asked the big question, which is, I'm looking to get certified by the end of the year. What's your advice? I think this is a place where, I know I keep saying it over and over and over and over again, but exam objectives can really help you here. They can really focus what you are doing. One of the problems that you run into with these exams is that there are so many topics that are covered. I wonder if I have a list of some of these topics that I can, or differences that I can share with you. I don't think I have it in this specific list, so I'm going to bring it up in a browser on my network, on my web server. I have something I want to show you, just so you have a perspective of this. I'm going to go into the Start Here section of the N10-009 on my website, where I talk about getting Network Plus certified, because I have a link down at the bottom about the latest Network Plus exam and when it's retired, and it talks about the N10-008 and 009. And there's a link over to an article that asks about the differences between these two. And in these differences, the thing that I wanted to show you was this. So every presentation needs to have a good Venn diagram. So here we are. This is a comparison very broadly of the N10-008 exam, which is the big circle on the left, and the N10-009 exam, which is the somewhat smaller circle on the right. Now, obviously, this is sort of old news. The N10-009 exam has been out for a year at this point, but there were 590 objectives on the older version, the 008. Notice that's a smaller number, 430 on the 009. We knew it was a smaller number because the circle was smaller. If you did the math, you would see that the N10-008 was 590 pixels high and the N10-009 was 430 pixels high. These are to scale, so you can appreciate the relationship, the proportion between all of these. So we also have, it shows you the yellow are the objectives that were dropped and the blue are the objectives that were added. Look how much was dropped from the N10-008, and look how many were added to the 009. So as I talk about this particular question, where we had someone that really went through the process of trying to know what do I study, how much do I study, where this comes from, I really think you should focus on the exam objectives. They are the thing that is going to point you in the right direction. So if we bring up, for example, this is the set of N10-009 exam objectives. We start with section 1, explain concepts related to the Open Systems Interconnection Reference Model. That, of course, is the OSI model. The OSI model is one that has different layers that we can pull from, layers 1 through layer 7. And, of course, we have the different names for all of those different layers. And, of course, it's important to understand how these relate to each other. And, of course, we have a video that goes through all of those. This is your first checklist. So if you know everything you need to know about layer 1, you can check that off your list. If you know everything there is to know about layer 2, you can check that one off your list. Layer 3 and similar. You can just go through your list and use this as your checklist. When you finish everything in section 1.1, you can put a big check mark on that and go to section 1.2, compare and contrast network appliances, applications and functions, physical and virtual appliances such as routers, switches, firewalls, IPS, IDS, load balancers, proxy, network attached storage, storage area network, wireless access points, wireless controllers, content delivery network, virtual private network, quality of service, Time to live. That is a lot of objectives, and we're only in section 1.2. So if you're thinking at this point, wow, that's a lot, that is really where you're going to focus on trying to understand where you need to study. This will tell you. This will give you immediate feedback. It might take you an hour to go through because you can easily go through each one of these and say, oh, for documentation, can I describe the difference between a physical and logical diagram? It'd be better if I had it on the right page when I did that. There we go. Physical and logical diagram. Can I do that? Yes or no? If it's yes, it's green. If it's no, it's red, and we'll come back to it. Next one is rack diagrams. Can I explain why rack diagrams are important? Yes or no? So you should be able to go through this list. Even though there are hundreds of objectives, you can go through them relatively quickly. But after you're done, you will then have a list of things you really know, but perhaps more importantly, things that you maybe you're not 100% on. There's where you should focus your efforts. I think this is a great way, a great checklist to use when you're working through your studies. So if you're running into that scenario where it feels overwhelming, you have a lot of topics, there are a lot of things you still need to memorize, but you're not really sure where you're missing that information, the objectives will tell you where you're missing that information. It will be very, very, very clear to you. And I would absolutely recommend you do that to be able to keep track of how you get that percentage up. How are you supposed to track what you know and what you don't know unless you've gone through those objectives and you really understand what they're trying to tell you? All right, let's find some more questions. Of course, you can submit your questions at any time. Go to professormesser.com/QA and you will be able to submit those in our list. Let me see if I can find the questions. There we are. Let's keep going through that list. I think there's quite a bit that we go through in understanding what we are doing. Let's, instead of looking at individual certifications, let's look a little bit broader at getting that job in IT, because I think many of us that are going through this certification journey are working towards either getting their first job or getting a better job in IT, or maybe just a better job in general. Regardless of what they are doing, they may be moving into IT from a different field. So this question is one that does come up quite a bit, and I do have some points to make about this. Again, from my good friend Anonymous, who says, I understand that earning a certification does not guarantee getting a job, but it can certainly strengthen our resume. True. Do you have any tips on how to advocate for yourself after earning the cert? Or any other job market navigation tips would be amazing. Thank you, Professor. Love your content. I love you too, Anonymous. I always have. The thing that I probably would point you to first when it comes to really breaking down the details of what we need to know for a job hunt is I've tried to document everything I could think of. I listed out every possible thing that could help promote you or help you in your job hunt. And I put it into one video. It's in the YouTube video description of this video. It's called How to Get a Job in IT with No Experience, or something like this. Close to that. That's the title pretty much. How do you get a job in IT with no experience? Because that's where many people who go and get their certifications, they're just getting into this industry. They've just gotten their degree. They want to get an IT certification and get a job in the field. What do you even do? What are the best things you can do? What are some of the worst things that you can do? And I tried to focus on 4 individual elements. This video I just mentioned, How to Get a Job in IT with No Experience, is a 30-minute video. For those of you that have watched my videos before, you know that's a super long video for me to make. But it is in the same style and the same form of the training videos. I put a lot of detail and a lot of information in a very small package. There's not a lot of sitting around or a lot of talking about what we're going to talk about, which seems relatively pointless in a YouTube video. You're going to know what we're going to talk about because we're about to talk about it. I don't need to tell you. So that's why we don't do a lot of preamble for a lot of the videos that we are working on. Same thing with this one. It's 30 minutes of detailed information. And I focus on these topics. I focus on, the first is really understanding what value a formal education brings. Some people are going through a 2-year study, a 4-year study, and they're trying to get that formal degree. There is value in a formal degree, and I talk about that in the video. The second element is an industry certification. We are all certainly familiar with that. If you're on this live stream, an industry certification provides you with a set of credentials and information and things that a formal degree does not have, and I talk about that in the video as well. The third thing is it's good to get some type of experience. And I realize a lot of us don't have professional experience, which is someone has paid you to do this, but you may have certain cases where you have practical experience. Maybe you handle maintaining all of the Windows-based systems for your club or your school or your church. Maybe you have done some work with another group of people that was completely voluntary. You weren't paid for it, or maybe you were paid for it and you were able to put down a little bit of experience working on those things. Anytime you're working on those types of job type things that you're working on, and it could be just a volunteer type thing that you're doing, that's valuable experience. You're going to have stories from that, and those are the things you're going to bring to the table in your interview. And the part that I think a lot of us often scoff at, but perhaps one of the most important parts in your job hunt, is knowing someone who already works there. In my career in IT, I probably had, if I count jobs that I had where I was either hired by a company, but there are other times when I was promoted or moved to a different job within the same company, I will count those as well. But throughout my entire career, I probably had 11, 12, 15 jobs, somewhere in there. Especially within large corporate America, you tend to move up and around quite a bit. Once I got into the world of systems engineering and working for the manufacturer or the developer of a product, you tend to be in a job role and you kind of stay in that role for an extended period of time. But I went through a lot of different jobs. There were like 11, let's say 10, 11 jobs that I went through in that time frame in my entire career with IT. The very first job I got with the very first company, I didn't know anyone who worked there. They gave me the opportunity. I lucked into it. I got my foot in the door, not knowing anybody in the industry. They just trusted that I would have that particular position, and I took it. Every other job that I got after that, I got those jobs and I knew somebody who worked there or had already worked with somebody who works in that company. Every other job past the very first one, I knew somebody who worked there, and it made a difference. So often you'll hear people say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. That really should say, it's not only what you know, it's also who you know. Neither one of those things is better or worse than the other, but you really need to think about getting some relationships with people already out there. I'm not talking about being their best friend and meeting for drinks after work and spending time at their family reunion. I mean at a professional relationship. You know them as a professional acquaintance. I think that's a very good way to describe it. So how do you do that? How in the world do you become acquaintance to someone who's working at some of these biggest companies that are in your area without ever having a job in IT? Well, if in that particular case, you need to go to them. What you mean, like stand outside their house? No, do not do that. Instead, you want to go to the same events that they go to. So believe me, having been in this industry a very long time, not only as working in a corporation or an organization, but also working on the manufacturer side, I've been lucky enough to attend user group meetings and to sponsor user group meetings. So I would go to Microsoft user group meetings. I would go to Cisco user group meetings. These are all, most of the time, these are absolutely free to go to, by the way. And later in my career, I hosted Palo Alto Networks user group meetings. Not only are these user group meetings usually in a place where they're feeding you something to get you there. Maybe it's pizza, maybe it's barbecue, maybe you're meeting at a nice bar downtown, and they've got the room that's in the back that's just for meetings. And there's usually some type of formal presentation associated with it. There is sort of a sales thing that's going on, but it's really more about getting people in the room to talk to each other. That's what I've always seen with user group meetings. But that's where you meet people you've never met before. So find some of these. You can start with Microsoft user group meeting, Palo Alto Networks user group meetings. Get your face seen at these events. Become familiar with the people that are there. I will also tell you that in our industry, and probably others as well, but especially in our industry, we like hiring people we know, to the point that most organizations have a policy, a program, where if you bring in a resume of someone you know and we hire that person, they give you money. Really? Yes, really, they do. Which means that if I've worked with people that were very good. They were almost like recruiters. They were very good at collecting resumes and passing those resumes onto the HR department, effectively locking them in as the person who brought that resume into the company. And if that person got hired after 3 months, not only they are not only hiring people, but after 3 months, they also get a finder's fee. They get a referral fee for bringing that person into the company. So you may be very timid about meeting people at these user group meetings, but what you might find is the people at the user group meeting are very receptive to taking your resume because there might be a financial benefit. And now they've met you. They understand the things you understand. You've talked about and wanted to know more about their company. They know what positions are open at their company. And it might be something as simple as saying, hey, it's my very first Microsoft user group meeting. Haven't been to one of these before. I just got my degree. I'm looking for a job in this field. What do you do? Where do you work? Oh, I work at, Megatropolis X up here. That's around the corner. Oh, that big facility with that huge campus with the multiple buildings and the many people that you've hired for IT. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. Well, now you know somebody who works in this big company. Obvious next question. Do you know if anybody's hiring for system administration, help desk credentials, or entry-level positions? Or you know of any entry-level positions open in IT right now? No, but if you send me your resume, or can I send you my resume and you can pass it on to your HR department, lock me in. Especially, you might even want to bring up if you've got a program for a referral program. I'll give you my resume. I haven't given it to anybody within that company yet. You might be able to something might come of that. There might be an advantage there. So you even might want to present that idea, but more often than not, you'll find them saying, oh yeah, just send me your resume. Let's get on your LinkedIn. Let's get this connected up. And now you start meeting people. Now they become an acquaintance. Now you can go to submitting these resumes, finding these people at these companies, and maybe you finally get to the point where you get a phone call with them. You get that first screening call. It's a screening call because that's the one where they're trying to decide, do we really want to bring you in to talk to us directly? Or should we just take you off the list right now? They've already looked at your resume and you passed through at least that section of it. It was an internal referral, so they might even be giving you a little bit more of a chance. So now's the screening part. And you can say, oh yeah, I know Bill. He works over on your database team. We talk all the time at the Microsoft user group meeting. That's all you have to say. Because quite honestly, that's the extent of your relationship with Bill. But you know someone who works there. They know you. That's all you have to do. That's it. We're not talking about a detailed level of analysis and we've already been working together for years and our grandfathers worked together. They were in the war together. You don't have to go down to that level. Yeah, just know them from the user group meeting. That's it. That's all we have to work through. So hopefully that's given you an idea of things that might help you and working through all of those. But I think that's a great way to get your foot in the door somewhere. And maybe you don't have formal education. Maybe you don't have industry certifications yet. Maybe you've not really done a lot of hands-on work. You'd be surprised how that last element of knowing someone who works there can help get you in the door and give you the opportunity to then wow them. It's not going to take care of everything. It's not an easy button. It's not an automatic hire. But if you're looking, you just need to get in the door. That's our focus. You've got to take it from there. your responsibility at that point to wow them, to show them things that you are doing. And in that video, I do talk about how are you going to wow them? And we talk about doing some labs at home and what those labs might look like. Creating reports and information from the labs that you've created. There is a practical side to doing labs at home, and I want to give you something that is a deliverable, something that is actionable. These are the terms that we use when you're talking with this. So, for example, we're networking people on the network study group. Maybe we want to set up a firewall and a router, or maybe a firewall configured as a router, and set that up as our primary firewall, and start gathering more metrics about what we are doing on our local network. And then create reports based on the number of attacks that we see coming in line. Because many of these firewalls have an IPS in them. Why not have it start flagging every time it sees an attack on your network? And then you could say, oh, I did a great lab last month. I set up a separate firewall. Here it is. You set up, you can name any type of public or available open source firewall that's available. I set up this firewall. I turned on the IPS, and I just watched to see how many attacks I would get on my network by just existing, by just being here. And can you guess how many I got in a 24-hour period? There it is. There, you've just opened the door to a conversation. That's the stories, the type of stories that we're looking for you to bring to an interview. Because now everybody's in, no, how many attacks did you get in 24 hours? Tell me. Oh, well, I did a report of it. Here it is. Boom. Here's the report. That would be one of the best interviews ever, by the way. If somebody was to bring into me the same type of reports that we were hoping they would be creating in this role, that's phenomenal. Obviously, it's different equipment. It's a different firewall. It's a different process, but it's the same concept within the equipment that they have. So nothing changes in what you're trying to do. You're trying to get reports. You're trying to get information about where you fit in your security posture. You want to understand how many people really are attacking, how much bandwidth was used, what type of attacks were they, what is the distribution of these attacks based on where people are in the world. These are all great reports. This is all great information. You could spend half your interview just talking about that. So those are ways that you can get around worrying about, oh, I've never had a job in IT, but I have all of these. I have a story. I have a story about a project. I have a story about these reports, and I have a story about what I did once I saw this information. That's what you want in an interview, is a story. You want multiple stories. Ideally, you want two really good stories like that. And then maybe another one you kind of keep in your pocket. Maybe not as good, but still something they want even more. You can do that maybe in the next set of interviews. Maybe they bring you back and you go through that and work even as you're stepping through all of those. So that's my recommendation. Check out that video. I do go through the process of describing how I think you might go through the process of doing that, what really would be the best way to do that. So hopefully that's given you some ideas, and certainly might give you even ideas not even in the video. It might prompt you to think about other things that will help you with the process of looking for that job or looking for that better job. Once you get the job, we have this question, again from Anonymous, who says, as a person who just got their first job as a network admin, great first job, what do you say about going through imposter syndrome or always making the ticket/issue more complex than needed? This is something you should become very, very, very comfortable with, because it will be with you forever. I think it will be with you a very long time, because you never get away from imposter syndrome, at least not completely. And here's why. It's not a bad reason. It's actually a good reason why we never get past this imposter syndrome. For those of you not familiar with this syndrome, not a real syndrome. It's not something you need to see a doctor about. You'll never know if this drug is right for you, because there's nothing you can take to get you over the imposter syndrome, other than a lot of knowledge. That's really what's going to help you. The problem, though, if it is a problem, it's really not a problem. It's really an advantage for this industry, is that you will never know everything. I know this may be a shocker to you. This may be something that that you may not have considered, is you will never know everything there is to know about technology. So this is the natural progression. Maybe you just don't know what you don't know yet. Eventually, you will get to a point where you do know what you don't know. There is a whole process and a series of these that we can go through. But from the perspective of someone working in the industry and has been working in the industry a very, very, very long time, there are certain things that you will become very, very, very knowledgeable about. Those will be your niches. When somebody has a question about that thing or that software or that server, you're on it. You know the configuration settings. You know where the file is kept. You know what the options are. You know how to optimize it. You know how the packets look going across the network. You know it like it is the back of your hand. Those are very good things to know about. And in fact, the bulk of your leverage that you run into when you move from place to place to place is those niches. I highly recommend you find a niche you enjoy and be one of those people that knows everything that you can possibly know about that particular niche. But I'll also tell you, even then, there will be things about that technology you just don't know about because it's impossible to know everything. The real challenge, of course, is you become an expert in that niche. And then somebody says, yeah, but I need you to work on this over here. Oh, I'm not as strong on that as I'm on this. Well, but we got a problem with that. So you have to fix that. So go fix that. Or you even go, okay, well, I need the manuals. Let me find some documentation. Maybe there's a good YouTube video on this. Maybe somebody's a blog entry about it. Maybe somebody in our organization has already worked on this before. You call anybody and everybody who has familiarity with that technology, and they will help you and they will teach you, and you will know it for next time. This is the process we always go through in this industry. It's very common in an organization to have subject matter experts, SMEs. You'll see it abbreviated. Those subject matter experts are the ones that really know about that thing. Well, we need 10 technicians. We're not going to hire 10 technicians that are an SME on the same topic. We're going to hire some technicians that are familiar with this, others that are SMEs on that, and you happen to be the SME on this thing. So anytime there's a question about that thing, you'll probably get those particular tickets or those particular involvements will come from you. But very often, these technologies talk to each other. They overlap each other. There's interaction with each other. Maybe you're having a problem with Active Directory, but you're not the subject matter expert in Active Directory, and you have a question about integrating a new forest because you bought a new company. There's a forest that they already run. How do we integrate that properly with the trust that we're doing? Let's talk to our Active Directory expert. And they will help you understand the pieces you know. So you're constantly growing, you're constantly learning, you're constantly becoming more familiar with these. There's still that fear of the unknown. I am very susceptible personally to imposter syndrome. I don't like not knowing of something. Mine is not a discomfort in my own abilities. Mine is a fear of the unknown. I get way too worked up about not knowing something. And what inevitably happens when you are working through something you don't know, your mind imagines it as an impossible thing to get over. It is so difficult. I can't believe now I have to jump into this. I'm not familiar with this technology at all. Let me read through the manual. Let me read the blog entries. Let me go to the software itself. Let me set it up in a VM. We'll run it in the lab a little bit and we'll install it from scratch. We'll get it running. I'll configure it. But then you do all those things and you realize, oh, that's it? Oh, I thought it was much harder than this. I thought there was more to it. My mind told me that it was horrible, that it was a nightmare, that I was never going to be able to learn this piece. In reality, I think most technologies are that way. Once you get into it, you realize, oh, you can break this up into the smaller pieces. You can learn a little piece at a time, and now you're much more familiar with it. It's the fear of the unknown that presents you with that anxiety, with that imposter syndrome that happens to be there. But I think once you really start taking a bite from all of these little technology fruits around the network, and you start learning more and more and more about them, it starts getting a lot better. And once you start going through that process multiple times, the first time you do it, it's very, very difficult to handle. There's a lot of anxiety there. But then the second time you do it, like, well, let's try this again. We'll go through it again with this new topic. But then you get to a point, once you go through it over and over and over again, you're like, okay, let's do another one. What's new today? Oh, we're doing AI. All right, let's do AI. And we'll learn the new topics and we'll learn the new technologies. And 5 years from now, there'll be another set of new technologies. And 5 years from now, there'll be another new set of technologies. The process never ends. So if you ever find yourself being very comfortable in your IT job, you know every answer that's presented to you, you understand all of the technologies that you're running inside of your organization. You can configure it with a blindfold on. You are so familiar. You have become the person to ask about all of the things that you're doing at that place. If you find yourself in that position, you should quit. You should. You should not be doing that anymore because you've now reached a point where you're not learning about the new things. You're not pushing yourself to get into that world of the unknown. And the rest of us are working in that world of the unknown every day. This technology world does not slow down. It does not stop. It does not shift into something more familiar. It shifts into something less familiar. It shifts into something new. It shifts into something you haven't done before. So I would recommend that if you find yourself being the smartest person in the room, it's time to go find a room where you're the dumbest person, because that's the only way that you're going to continue to grow in this industry. The more things you know about and the more comfortable you get with all of these other technologies, the more marketable you will be, the more money you will make in this industry, the more flexibility you will have in your job, in its role, and in the benefits you get. Those are all pretty important things. So it is a balancing act, of course, but I would really recommend that if you find yourself being very comfortable in a technology role, you're probably not in the right role. There's more for you. You're going to make more money by stepping out of that role. You're going to be more knowledgeable. You will be more marketable. You will have more benefits and availability, things you can do. You just need to put yourself out there and be able to make that happen. Don't worry about so much of the imposter syndrome. Don't worry so much of not knowing something, because the secret is we're all in that position. Everybody you work with in IT, everyone you've ever talked to in IT, people who are super knowledgeable in things relating to IT. There are topics I know so well that I've worked my entire career knowing how that technology works. I'm very good at the packet level, for example, because I spent years doing nothing but packet level analysis. So that's a good niche for me. It's one of the niches that I'm pretty good at. But you're going to find yourself after a while needing to know more. There's only so far I can go with that knowledge. I need to add other parts to it to level up in this industry. And you have to always keep thinking about leveling up and making that happen. So make sure you consider that process and don't worry that you don't know. If you don't know, it's an opportunity. It's always fun to learn something new. That's why we're in this. You know, one of the things I think a lot of people do is, especially in IT, is they're interested and curious about these technologies and they're fun to work with. That certainly describes me pretty well. And this is a thing where they are put into a position where they want to be able to learn more of these things. It's exciting to learn more of these technologies. Once you get past the fear, it really is exciting to learn how these things work. So I would recommend doing that. And I think that will take you very far. Suddenly the fears and the worries are behind you. You're spending your time learning. And the more you learn, the faster those fears go away. Let's keep going through your list of questions. We do have a few minutes left. So let's see if we can fit another one into this mix of things. There's a lot of questions a number of you have presented and sent in regarding some of the topics we did today. You'll notice that when I presented the answer to some of these topics, that it listed out the section of the exam objectives that it's associated with. And I also listed the name of the video. So if you are curious about the OSI model, it's that OSI video where I describe each one of those things. So there were a couple of questions that folks submitted that said, where do I find out more information on this? It's all in the course. Every single minute of every single video is out there on YouTube. You can watch the entire course for free, stream it, and see everything that's available there that you might need to know about these exam objectives. Let's keep going through your list. This is a good question. This is a very common question, and I think it's a good one to talk about. Abdel says, I'm currently planning to get into cybersecurity, which is that's a very broad term that doesn't actually mean anything, but we will try to define it as part of this question. Abdel continues, I was told that I need to know basic network. My question is, do I have to take the exam, or is watching my videos more than enough? This is the thing about IT security. And let's describe IT security and where it fits. So the world of IT, information technology, has many different areas to work in. I've worked in many of them. That's one of the benefits of IT is there's a lot of different silos and a lot of different technologies that you can get involved with. You might be involved with workstation management and keeping the local operating systems updated, patched, and installed. You might be working on networks. You might be a network administrator or a network designer or network planner, where you're designing and configuring switches, routers, you're connecting them all together, you're making the network redundant, you're configuring redundancy protocols and protocols like Spanning Tree, where you can protect your network and maintain it and keep it up and running. You might be working in the world of security, IT security. In the world of IT security, which I would argue is a subset of this term cybersecurity, because the term cybersecurity doesn't really refer to anything specific, I'm going to define that as IT security, which is the group within IT, information technology, that is responsible for protecting the data, people, the information that people are putting on the network, the communication across the network, and people accessing the network. It's protecting the data. There is no more important asset in every organization. The most important asset is the data. I know they tell you differently, but it's really the data. And so your job in IT security is to protect and make that data available to everybody on the network. So how do you get to that level? Because to be able to protect the data that is being moved across the network, that is being stored on these servers, that is being transmitted across the internet, that is being communicated over a VPN, I have to know networks. I have to know the way these applications work. I have to know the way the firewall is configured, and I have to know how the VPN works. There's a lot that's there. So I would argue that the folks that said that you need to know basic networking to get into IT security, they might have been couching that one a little bit soft. But in reality, if you want to get into the world of IT security, ideally, you would have a strong foundation in operating systems. You've been working as a workstation administrator and or perhaps a server administrator for Windows, for Linux, for Mac OS, or all of them. Because if you know the operating system, you can secure the operating system. You should also be an expert in networking, at least close to an expert. Close to a network expert, because you need to be able to work and understand the way frames are transmitted, how your switches are configured and what those configuration settings do, how they work, how to track those packets into the router, what the router is looking for, how it is configured, how it operates, how the VPN is layered on top of all of these things. Is this a policy-based VPN? Is this a route-based VPN? Is it an in-user VPN, like an SSL VPN, or is this a site-to-site IPsec VPN? There's all of these. Once you get into the details, suddenly it starts ballooning. You start getting all of these different topics that show up. So to be able to get into the real world of IT security, you need a good foundation in operating systems, you need a good foundation in networking, and you need some level of knowledge in security. But most of that can be taught as we go. Those are the keys. Now, there are, in a very limited level, relatively speaking, there are very few entry-level positions in the world of IT security or cybersecurity. But I think some of the most common of those entry-level security positions are those within a security operations center, or SOC, SOC. So this would probably be in the largest companies you would find. So if you're working in a large metropolitan area, you probably have some very large companies there. Those very large companies probably have a SOC. And in the SOC, you can think of the SOC as a help desk, but for security. So that's kind of what it is. So you need the same structure that you have in a generic help desk, but you need that structure that focuses on security issues. So you could still be that entry-level person on the service desk, on the help desk inside the SOC, but that at least gets you into the world of IT security. I don't know that that is a perfect way into IT security. I think a better path is knowing operating systems first, then networks, and then get into the security side. But one of the benefits about IT is there's lots of ways to get to the end game. There's not just one way to do it. We're not all on a rail where you start here and you must follow this path to get to there. Instead, we can see where we want to be. It's over there, but there's a lot of different pathways that can get you from where we are now to where that is over there. And it doesn't have to be through a SOC. It doesn't have to be through operating systems and networks. I'm giving you a very broad perspective of what I see in the industry and what I've seen in the industry working as a cybersecurity professional, working in the network field, working at a workstation, server administration. I've been in those roles before. They really, really are important when it gets to a point where you're trying to learn about cybersecurity. I'll give you an example on this. I know we're a little bit past the top of the hour, but let me give you a practical example. So I worked for Palo Alto Networks for about 7 or 8 years, depending on how you count it. Let's say 7 years, and worked there primarily 100% of the time, worked there as a senior systems engineer. I was responsible for knowing how to, from a technical perspective, understand everything about the way this firewall operates, understand how to present the benefits of that technology, and understand how to implement that technology in some of the largest networks in the world. Fascinating job, tons of fun, met some fantastic people, one of the best jobs I ever had. So that was something that, though, made me understand that I needed to build up to that point. They weren't hiring people to start working there that knew nothing about security. When you walked in the door, they wanted you to have a background. They wanted you to have a foundation that you could build on. At the time when I started there, they weren't actually selling their products yet. They had just started selling this product called a next generation firewall from this company nobody had heard of called Palo Alto Networks. I really did go work for a company, started working for a company at the startup level. And because of that, kind of came in just as they had created the product. They'd already been working on this for 3 years. Then they hired me and a bunch of people like me to be able to go around the world and tell people about how awesome this was. And it was. And as we all know now, it took the world by storm and has become an incredible success. Some could argue that's because I don't work there anymore. Hey, no, we did fine. 7 years. I had a blast there. And to watch the company grow. We went public. It was an amazing experience all in all. But I couldn't have done it just walking in the door with a college degree that says, yes, I know cybersecurity. They wanted people that were knowledgeable. And here's where I was going with this story is I got to a point where we needed to hire more people and we need to hire them quickly. So we need to hire more systems engineers. And there was a systems engineer manager in the Northeast who was really good at this. And he would have these questions that were very basic questions when you say them, but there's so much more to the question underneath the surface. And the one I liked the most, I brought this up before, the question I liked the most was one that said, tell us everything you know about ARP. That was what he started with. That's the first question of the interview. Tell us everything you know about ARP. Now, if your description only described the basics of the address resolution protocol, you use ARP to be able to find the MAC address associated with an IP address on a local network. That's not even close to being good enough yet. Now tell us more about ARP. What about proxy ARP? What about reverse ARP? What are the differences? When would you use them? Which one is rarely seen anymore? What about a gratuitous ARP? Wait, where'd all these ARPs come from? Suddenly the world is full of ARP. And yes, it is. And all of those different ARP types are important to know. All of them are used in some different way with these firewalls. And you need to have a complete understanding right off the top of your head. What is a gratuitous ARP? Where would you see that happen? Where would we use that? Where is it important to be able to find that? Where would you find a proxy ARP? Why would you have a proxy ARP? Why is this important? In what cases would you see that? You need to know that very, very well to be able to get to the next question in this interview. And if you don't, immediately we know where you stand. You're not going to get that job. If your reasoning behind ARP was just that, it's going to be hard to come back from that. I mean, we'll keep going with the interview. Let's talk about the next question we have, which of course is another question that is an open-ended question about a single technology that goes really, really deep if you want to do that. And there are certain positions where I have talked about these technologies and we've actually drawn out, well, here's the way the packet looks and here's where you'd have that information. And when you're working with IPsec, it's going to package these up and it's going to encrypt them and it's going to stick them in the packet and here's where it's going to go. And then how would you troubleshoot that? And how would you troubleshoot a phase 2 issue on an IPsec connection between two devices? One is a Palo Alto Networks and one's a third-party firewall. Go. Well, here's what I would do because it's the same process. It doesn't matter what manufacturer of the device is. It's the same process every time. It's part of the troubleshooting that you would do, but you would have needed to do that before. You would have needed to troubleshoot a IPsec tunnel between two devices where phase 2 is failing to be able to answer that question, because there is a personal knowledge of that you only get if you've gone through the troubleshooting process. It's very hard to fake that one. So that's why I tell people all the time, I would love it if you could get a high-end 6-figure cybersecurity role right out of school. That would be fantastic. The problem is that there are not many of those out there. And of the ones that are out there, you're not really making 6 figures yet because you just don't have the experience yet. You don't have the foundation yet. The more foundation you create, the higher you're asking effectively. That's the way this works. So work on building the foundation. The stronger the foundation, the higher the foundation, the more information in that foundation, the more flexibility and the more control you have of what you do in this career instead of relying on the jobs that you happen to be choosing from that are available out there. Just another thing that might help you as you go through the process of understanding, where do I go in this industry? What do I do? Where do I start? It's almost as important to pick a good landing spot, to pick the right place to go as it is to study and get these certifications and the other information you need to know. People often tell me, what do I need to know to get to start in a role with pen testing? I'm going to be a pen tester for a Fortune 100 company. Like, well, that sounds lovely, but what do you know about ARP? We really need to start there. Why don't you just start being the CEO? Why aren't you just going to be the next CEO of that company? We don't have the foundation yet. Why don't you start a role where you're now the CFO of the company? You're the CTO of the company. You don't start there because you haven't worked into that role yet. The same thing applies with technology. Go into the roles that you are good at, the ones that you have planned for, the ones that you are knowledgeable with. Get your foot in the door. And I know we're way past top of the hour, but let me kind of leave you on this point because this happened recently where somebody went through the process of putting their resume out there for an open position. They went through the interview process for doing that. The company offered them a role. This was their very first entry-level role into IT, and they decided not to take it because it really wasn't exactly what they wanted to do. And I said, you call them back up right now and you tell them you're going to take this job. Do not tell me you turned down this job, this entry-level position in IT, of which you have none, and you didn't put your foot in that door. Go back and put your foot in the door because it doesn't matter what this job is now. In IT, you're going to be in a job somewhere 1 to 3 years. After that 1 to 3 years, either the job that you're in is going to change a bit, change your focus, or you're going to move to a new position. Go back and get that job, get your foot in the door. Maybe it's something that you're not in love with for the next 9 months, the next year. Doesn't matter. You're going to learn an amazing amount of information. You're going to build that foundation, and you're going to position yourself to go to the next job that you are going to love. So there you go. That's my approach to this. There's more than one way to go about doing this. And I think if you're someone who is working on getting the foot in the door, don't miss your opportunities, and certainly don't turn those opportunities away. There is lots of room to grow in this industry. I have not found the ceiling yet. It's got to be there somewhere, maybe not. There's so many things you can do in this industry, so many places to go, so many ways to grow, and so many ways to support yourself and your family. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this. Well, with that, I think we've come to the end of another hour. Thank you so much for your time in the first part of the study group. And also thank you for your questions in the after show. They're always pretty interesting and different concepts and different ideas that you're presenting. I love to hear about them. And it's something that I think other people can gain use of as well. Thank you for submitting those questions. We do one of these study groups every month for Network Plus. We have a Security Plus study group planned for next week. Come back next Wednesday, same time, same place. I'll be doing the same information, but with all new questions for Security Plus. And then, as I've already mentioned, you can always go to our calendar, professormesser.com/calendar. Although I have said our August dates will be changing just a little bit, so keep your eye on that calendar to know when our next Network Plus study group is going to be. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time on our Network Plus study group. Thanks, everybody.